Every time he smiled, someone died, and no one noticed until it was too late. In the summer of 1867, in a forgotten corner of Missouri, a wave of death swept through a quiet farming town. 3 adults perished under mysterious circumstances. Livestock dropped dead by the dozens. The townsfolk whispered about bad omens, but one name kept surfacing. Elias Granger, an 8-year-old boy with porcelain skin, icy blue eyes, and an unsettling calm. He didn't cry at funerals. He didn't flinch at blood. He simply watched, listened, and wrote. This is a true story buried in the darkest corners of American history, a disturbing case that even now chills archivists and historians. Some call it an unsolved mystery. Others believe it was pure evil wrapped in innocence. But one fact remains. What Elias recorded in his leather-bound notebook was never meant to be read by anyone until now. This is the child they never warned you about. They thought he was just a quiet boy until people started dying wherever he went. In the sweltering heat of Missouri's summer in 1867, a remote town was unraveling. First, a farmer's wife drowned in her own well. Days later, an elderly man fell from a cliff he'd hiked for 20 years. Then a child suffocated at the bottom of a dry, stone-cold cistern. 3 tragedies in just 12 days. And while the townspeople searched for causes blaming curses, contaminated water, even God's wrath, one figure never seemed disturbed. Elias Granger, age 8, watched from behind his thick farmhouse window, hands folded, eyes wide, scribbling notes in a small leather-bound book. He wasn't curious. He was collecting patterns. As rumours swirled, his aunt and uncle dismissed it all. He's delicate, they'd say. Smart, a bit strange, but harmless. Harmless until Dr. Thaddeus Blackwell, a state physician, was sent to investigate the string of deaths. What he would find in Elias's drawings and how Elias greeted him would change the course of American psychiatric history forever. Because what looked like coincidence soon began to feel like orchestration, and Elias, he was already waiting. Part 2. The first contact begins where the doctor finally knocks. Every time someone died, he was nearby watching, listening, remembering. In the summer of 1867, Sedalia, Missouri was a farming town surrounded by silent cicadas and suspicion. People knew each other by name, trusted neighbours with keys, and left doors unlocked until the deaths started. No one saw it coming. A beloved preacher collapsed mid-sermon, eyes wide open, body frozen in place. 2 days later, a stable of prize horses suffocated in their stalls. No wounds, no noise, no sign of panic. A week later, a baby girl was found lifeless in her crib, her tiny hands curled into fists. The only thing those deaths had in common, Elias Granger had been there. At just 8 years old, he was easy to overlook, pale skin, neatly combed hair, always polite, never loud. But there was something off. He never blinked long, he never played outside, and he never ever cried. Locals whispered about bad luck and ill omens, but no one dared accuse a child. Still, a cold wind seemed to follow him even in July. Some said he was cursed. Others said he was brilliant. But one man would later write he wasn't sent by the devil. He was the devil's answer. And the worst part, no one stopped him. Because at first glance, Elias looked like every other boy. But behind those eyes, something watched back. They thought he was grieving until they saw what he drew. After the 3rd funeral in just 10 days, the townspeople were suffocating in fear, but no one dared voice it. Elias Granger sat in the front row of every service, feet barely touching the floor, hands clasped in his lap, like a perfect little mourner. He didn't shed a single tear. Instead, as the coffins were lowered into the ground, he would quietly flip open his leather-bound notebook and begin sketching. Not flowers, not angels, but precise diagrams of the church's rafters, the preacher's pulse, the way blood pools behind the eyes. People said he was sensitive, artistic, gifted, but the local school teacher, Miss Aldridge, found something different. Left behind on her desk was a page from Elias's notebook, showing a bird's eye view of the entire town crossed out with red ink, one house at a time. The pattern made no sense until they realized each red X marked a home where someone had died, and 4 more were circled. It wasn't grief, it was a system, a quiet methodical logic hiding behind the eyes of a boy who never once looked surprised. Whatever Elias was doing, it had already begun. The first time someone knocked on Elias's door, he was already waiting. Sheriff Malcolm Burke, a man who'd buried 2 friends that week, arrived at the Granger farmhouse under a blood-orange sunset. He wasn't there to accuse, just to ask questions. But what he saw instead never left him. The house smelled of lemon oil and iron. Elias's aunt, a pale, nervous woman, offered tea with trembling hands. And there at the kitchen table sat the boy, calm, still, staring at the sheriff like he'd been expecting him for days. Elias didn't greet him. He simply slid a folded page across the table, an anatomical drawing of a horse's lungs, labelled in perfect cursive, even down to the ruptured bronchioles. "That's what killed Mr. Redfield's colt," the boy said softly. Too much panic, not enough air. The sheriff said nothing, but the cold prickling at the back of his neck said everything. Elias shouldn't have known that. No autopsy had been done. No doctor had spoken a word. And yet this child described it with clinical detachment. Then, as Sheriff Burke stood to leave, Elias added, "If you come tomorrow, I can show you what's next." From that moment forward, no one knocked without fear, because Elias Granger didn't just observe death, he anticipated it. And Sedalia was just beginning to understand what that meant. He didn't knock like a stranger, he entered like a subject under study. When Dr. Thaddeus Blackwell, a state-appointed physician from St. Louis, arrived in Sedalia, he expected hysteria, superstition maybe, a bout of undiagnosed illness. What he found was something far colder. A town that whispered a boy they avoided, and deaths they no longer questioned. Locals begged him not to visit the Granger home, but Blackwell was a man of science, not fear. He carried a leather satchel, medical charts, and a healthy skepticism. But when Elias opened the door, before Blackwell even knocked, what little doubt he had began to rot. The boy's first words weren't "hello" or "who are you," but "you're late." "I thought you come yesterday." That sentence would haunt the doctor for years. Inside, the air was too still, too staged. A sketch of the human brain hung beside a drawing of a fox with its skin peeled back. Elias called it study material. And as Blackwell sat across from the boy, notebook in hand, he began to realize this wasn't going to be an ordinary examination. This was a case study that was already writing itself. And Elias, he was both subject and scientist. He knew my name before I spoke it, and not in the charming way. That was the first note Dr. Thaddeus Blackwell scribbled after meeting Elias Granger. The journey from St. Louis had taken 2 days by train and horse through mud-slicked roads and towns whispering about the boy who watches. Blackwell arrived with logical assumptions: lead poisoning, mass hysteria, maybe a neglected child developing odd behaviours. But none of it prepared him for what Elias said the moment they met. "Doctor." "Blackwell," the boy said calmly, standing barefoot at the doorway, "you fractured your right tibia when you were 7. I have questions about your limp." The doctor froze. That detail was never disclosed in his records, and certainly not common knowledge. Elias wasn't guessing. He was observing, calculating. And the worst part, he smiled just slightly, like he already knew what came next. Inside, Blackwell noted the walls were covered in anatomical sketches, bone diagrams, even crude neurology maps copied from books far too advanced for a child. But Elias hadn't copied them. He'd modified them, improved them. He's not unwell. Blackwell wrote that night, hand trembling. He's unnaturally aware. And if he's faking, he's better than anyone I've ever met. And still Elias hadn't even begun his real performance. He doesn't answer questions, he redirects them. That was Dr. Blackwell's second observation after an hour alone with Elias Granger. Seated across from the boy at a worn wooden table, the physician began his routine assessment, cognitive checks, basic emotional prompts, behavioral cues. But with every question, Elias responded with another, often more precise, more invasive. "Do you have trouble sleeping?" Blackwell asked. Elias blinked once and replied, "Do you dream in colour or only red? Have you ever hurt anyone? Silence then. Have you ever wanted to?" It wasn't evasion. It was control. Every exchange left Blackwell feeling dissected, exposed, as if the boy were studying him, rather than the other way around. Elias's speech was slow, almost surgical. He never stuttered, never hesitated, and never looked away. His eyes didn't dart like a child's, they locked, focused, measured. There were no toys in the house, no books for children, only medical journals and field reports, half of them annotated in Elias's careful, chilling handwriting. He sees the world as data, Blackwell later wrote. But I don't think he sees people as people. I think he sees systems, weakness, leverage. And just when the doctor began to doubt reality itself, Elias made a request. "Would you like to see where I keep my predictions? They think I'm guessing, but I'm not. I'm just early." That's what Elias whispered as he led Dr. Blackwell down the narrow cellar steps behind the kitchen. The boy moved without hesitation, as if he'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. The cellar was cold, silent, and meticulously organized. No dust, no cobwebs, just rows of boxes, each labeled with names and dates. Blackwell bent down, opened one, and froze. Inside were dozens of hand-drawn maps, timelines and cross-referenced diagrams of local families who had married whom, which bloodlines carried disease, which homes had structural weaknesses. Then there were prediction sheets, names not yet crossed out, circled dates, probabilities written in red ink. One sheet read, Martha W., 3% spinal rupture via ladder fall, reassess in 2 days. 2 lines down, Sheriff Burke, 87% cardiac arrest in heatwave. Avoid confrontation. This wasn't a game. Elias had created a private death registry based on observable patterns and uncanny inference. But it was the final box that made Blackwell recoil. It contained sketches of his own arrival, his conversation with Elias, even the wine stain on his coat he hadn't noticed yet. This isn't a child, he thought, heart pounding. This is an intelligence that doesn't belong here. Elias simply looked at him and said, "Now you're part of it too." By the time they realized what he was doing, 5 more people were dead, each one exactly as Elias had predicted. Rumors had turned into hushed prayers, and fear had become routine. But now Elias wasn't just observing patterns, he was updating them, altering them, which raised a terrifying question no one wanted to ask. Was he predicting death or deciding it? And that's when the town began to unravel, because Elias Granger had crossed a line, and someone finally decided to stop him. It started with a house fire no one could explain, but Elias had already drawn it 2 days earlier. The sketch showed the precise angle of collapse, the singed tree limb, even the cracked window pane that would later reveal how the flames entered. The victim, a widow named Helen Cartwright, had never lit a fire that night. Her stove was cold, her candles unburnt, but her name had already been crossed out in Elias's ledger. That's when the town shifted from fearful to fractured. People locked their doors, covered their windows, whispered his name like a curse. Some said he was cursed. Others said he was God's punishment, but no one dared confront him. Not yet. Dr. Blackwell, now a shaken shell of skepticism, tried to warn officials in St. Louis, but the letter never arrived. The courier vanished on the way back. Sheriff Burke disappeared next. His hat was found on the riverbank. His name had been circled weeks earlier. The pattern was no longer abstract, it was active. And worst of all, Elias had stopped drawing entirely. Whatever came next, he didn't need to sketch anymore, because everything was already in motion. When the town preacher tried to cast him out, Elias asked if he'd like to know the exact hour he'd die. That was the final sermon. Pastor Whitmore had gathered the townspeople in the chapel, trembling hands wrapped around his Bible voice, rising as he called Elias an unnatural vessel. But Elias didn't protest. He sat in the back pew, expression blank, swinging his feet. And when the preacher pointed to him and shouted, "You are not of God?" Elias stood up and calmly replied, "Neither are you. Not since the summer of '87 behind your brother's barn." Silence choked the room. The preacher turned pale. His wife collapsed. Elias walked out untouched. By morning, Whitmore was found slumped at the altar. Heart stopped. No signs of struggle. But Elias's notebook had a time scribbled in red ink, 4:06 a.m., resolved. From then on, people crossed the street to avoid the boy. Families packed and left overnight. Blackwell stayed not to study, but to survive. And every day he saw the boy staring into nowhere, like he was waiting for something no one else could see. Not even death moved fast enough to keep up with Elias now. And Sedalia had run out of places to hide. The town finally broke the night Elias vanished and left behind a message no one could explain. Dr. Blackwell awoke to the sound of wind howling unnaturally through the trees, his candle extinguished, though the air was still. The Granger house was empty. No sign of Elias. Just a stack of neatly folded clothes on the bed, and a small slip of paper pinned to the door. All variables accounted for. Simulation complete. That morning, 7 people reported seeing Elias walking into the woods, but in 7 different directions. One saw him near the river. Another swore he stepped into the old barn. A child claimed he watched Elias split into 2. No tracks, no prints, no logical path. Just whispers. Whispers that he had reset something, that Sedalia was never real, that they were all part of a study, and the study had ended. Blackwell, trembling and sleepless, returned to the cellar. The boxes were gone. Only a single drawing remained, a sketch of Sedalia with a red line slashing through it, and the words, "Terminated. Phase 1. Whatever Elias was, he hadn't been trying to escape. He'd been trying to finish. And they were all just data. Every soul, every fear, every death. Behind every closed door in Sedalia, fear whispered Elias's name like a curse. The town's fragile silence shattered as bodies began to pile, each death more inexplicable than the last. Yet Elias remained eerily calm, almost clinical, as if observing a grand experiment unfold. His leather-bound notebooks, filled with grotesque diagrams and chilling annotations, became the town's dark scripture. Even the sheriff, once a pillar of strength, found himself paralyzed by doubt and dread. As authorities scrambled to contain the chaos, Elias quietly prepared for his next move, one that would force Sedalia to confront a terrifying truth: this was no child's game. And what came next would change everything. In the cold, dark cellar beneath the Granger farmhouse, Dr. Blackwell uncovered what no one dared to imagine: a sinister archive of death and calculation. Leather-bound journals lay open, filled with meticulous drawings of animals dismembered, their agony recorded in clinical detail. But the horror didn't stop there. There were sketches of people, neighbours, friends, even the missing sheriff depicted in stages of suffering, their deaths planned with chilling precision. Elias had transcended childhood. He had become a scientist of pain, an architect of terror. The pages revealed a mind unburdened by conscience, fascinated not by empathy but by control. Blackwell's hands trembled as he read notes predicting how long it would take for someone to drown, how the panic of a bee attack could be weaponized, and how isolation in a well would break a child's will. The boy who seemed innocent had orchestrated horror with the calm of a surgeon, and Sedalia's darkest nightmare was only beginning. Elias didn't just witness the horrors, he engineered them with ruthless precision. His drawings detailed the slow suffocation of a child trapped underwater, the strategic placement of stones to trigger fatal falls, and the calculated torment of isolation that broke young Jacob Boyd's spirit. Each sketch was annotated with exact timings, physiological responses, and psychological breakdowns, demonstrating a terrifying understanding of human anatomy and suffering. Dr. Blackwell's disbelief turned to dread as he realized these were not the ramblings of a disturbed child, but a cold, methodical mind orchestrating death like a scientist running experiments. Elias's notebooks shattered the town's illusions of innocence, proving that evil could be born, not made, and that the most chilling monsters wear the face of a child. What came next wasn't just murder. It was a sinister study of life and death that would haunt Sedalia forever. When confronted with the horrifying evidence, Elias showed no fear, only cold, calculating curiosity. He spoke of his experiments with chilling detachment, describing how Mary Ford struggled against the water for nearly 3 agonizing minutes before surrendering, how Tobias Kern was driven to his fatal fall by a swarm of bees strategically released, and how Daniel Boyd was trapped and left to die slowly, his survival carefully monitored. Elias's voice lacked remorse. Instead, it was filled with scientific fascination, as if discussing a mere project rather than human lives. Dr. Blackwell realized this was not a child wrestling with conscience, but a predator analyzing prey. The unsettling truth shattered every hope Sedalia had clung to. Innocence was a mask, and behind Elias's pale eyes lay a mind bent on mastering death itself. The nightmare was no longer hidden, and it was far from over. Elias's true intentions came into brutal focus when he revealed his next target, his own family. With chilling calmness, he explained to Dr. Blackwell that the experiments weren't over, and that the ultimate test would be to see how those closest to him reacted to betrayal and impending death. The boy meticulously prepared weapons and poisons, treating the planned murders like a scientific procedure rather than an act of cruelty. His eerie politeness masked a ruthless mind capable of orchestrating unimaginable horrors. For the first time, the doctor understood that Elias wasn't a victim of circumstance, but a calculating predator. The fragile trust the town had placed in innocence shattered irreparably. Sedalia was no longer just a haunted town, it was a cage for a monster in the guise of a child. And the darkest chapter was about to unfold. The confrontation erupted in a violent struggle that shattered any remaining illusions. Elias moved with terrifying speed and precision, wielding knives like a seasoned surgeon. Dr. Blackwell, though older and stronger, was forced into a desperate battle for survival. Every slash, every calculated movement revealed a child shaped by cold calculation rather than innocence. As the fight escalated, the sheriff and deputies burst in their guns drawn, breaking the chaos apart. Elias sat calmly bloodied but unbroken, his icy blue eyes still sharp with unsettling intelligence. He whispered, "You can't prove a child's guilt when they wear innocence like armor." That chilling statement tore through the town's fragile faith in justice and left a haunting question in its wake. How do you fight a monster no one believes exists? Sedalia's nightmare was no longer a secret, and it had only just begun. Locked away in the state asylum, Elias adapted quickly, learning to mimic emotions he never truly felt. His cold intelligence fooled many convincing staff. He was a troubled child on the path to recovery. But behind the smiles and tears was a mind still calculating, still plotting. Mysterious deaths continued inside the asylum's walls, shadows of his dark influence. When Elias vanished without a trace one stormy night, the terror didn't end, it evolved. The question lingered. Had they ever truly contained the boy, or simply unleashed a nightmare upon the world? The story was far from over, and what came next would haunt America's darkest corners forever. Elias's disappearance from the asylum wasn't just an escape, it was the beginning of a new nightmare that haunted the Midwest for decades. Reports of strange deaths, inexplicable accidents, and eerie sightings of a pale boy with icy blue eyes began to surface in towns miles away. Families whispered about the ghost child who seemed to bring misfortune wherever he roamed. Dr. Blackwell spent the rest of his life collecting scattered evidence, documenting cases that bore the unmistakable signature of Elias's cold intellect and calculated cruelty. The official records dismissed these as coincidence, but those who studied the patterns knew the truth. Elias had evolved from a disturbed boy into a legend of horror, a dark force that questioned the very nature of evil. His story shattered the comforting illusion that children are innocent by nature. And somewhere out there, the legacy of Elias Granger still lingers, waiting, watching, and learning. Though Elias vanished, his chilling legacy left a stain that no one could erase. Towns once peaceful became breeding grounds for paranoia and fear, as unexplained tragedies kept unfolding, people falling ill without cause, livestock dying, mysteriously shadows glimpsed in the corner of an eye. Dr. Blackwell's journals, uncovered years later, revealed patterns so precise that they could only belong to a mind like Elias's, cold, calculating, and relentlessly cruel. The authorities branded him a myth, but those who dared dig deeper understood the terrifying truth. Evil had worn the face of a child and learned how to hide behind innocence. The haunting question remains, if Elias survived, is he still out there growing smarter, waiting for the right moment to strike again? The echoes of Sedalia's darkest chapter refuse to fade, reminding us that sometimes the most dangerous monsters never truly disappear. Years after Elias disappeared, the shadows he cast continued to stretch across the heartland. Families in distant towns reported unsettling encounters, glimpses of a pale figure watching silently from the edges of their vision, a childlike silhouette that vanished when confronted. Local legends grew around the silent watcher, blamed for sudden tragedies and unexplainable disappearances. Dr. Blackwell's private journals, released posthumously, sparked renewed interest in Elias's case, revealing the chilling possibility that some minds are born without empathy, capable of manipulating and destroying without remorse. The unnerving truth shattered the comforting belief in childhood innocence, leaving a lingering question: could the most terrifying monsters wear the most innocent faces and remain hidden among us? Today, Elias's story serves as a haunting reminder that evil is not always loud. It can be quiet, patient, and unimaginably calculated. Despite official denials, the echoes of Elias Granger's reign of terror refused to fade. The Missouri Historical Society's archives hid Dr. Blackwell's detailed journals for decades, their contents too disturbing for public eyes. When finally released, they ignited debates across medical and legal fields about the nature of evil and the fragile line between genius and madness. Scholars wrestled with the impossible idea that a child could embody such profound darkness, challenging centuries-old beliefs about innocence and morality. Meanwhile, Sedalia's abandoned Granger Farm stood as a silent monument to fear, its gates rusted and grounds avoided by locals. The chilling legacy of Elias wasn't just a historical footnote, it became a cautionary tale whispered in the darkest corners of America. Because sometimes the past refuses to stay buried, and the monsters we create never truly die. In the final pages of Dr. Blackwell's journals lies a warning still relevant today. Elias Granger was not an anomaly, but a glimpse into what humanity could become when stripped of empathy and conscience. His case forced a reckoning in psychology and criminal justice, challenging the comforting myth that children are innocent by nature. The chilling possibility remains that somewhere hidden among us walks a mind as cold, as calculating, and as dangerous as Elias's once was. His story serves as a stark reminder that evil wears many faces, often the most innocent, and that darkness can thrive silently in the most unexpected places. The legacy of Elias Granger is not just history, it's a haunting call to vigilance, echoing through America's darkest shadows, demanding we never look away. The story of Elias Granger forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of evil and innocence. It challenges the idea that darkness only exists in shadows far away. It can live quietly within the most unexpected faces, even those of children. As you reflect on this chilling tale, ask yourself, how well do we truly know the people around us? If their story unsettled you, share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe happened to Elias? Don't forget to save this video to revisit its haunting truths and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into America's darkest mysteries. Your next story is just a click away. Stay curious, stay vigilant.